We continue our conversations here on Good Morning Namibia. Now, the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture is organizing the 2022 National Conference on Education for August this year. In light of this, the Education Ministry is embarking on regional consultative meetings from the 30th of May until the 11th of June to unpack challenges affecting education and affecting education's and teacher and learning outcomes. Now, joining us with me to give us more details on this is the Executive Director in the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, that is Sanet Steenkamp. Good morning, ma'am. Thank you very much for being here.
Good morning, Elagun. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Now, Edie, I want us to start from the very beginning. Please help us understand what the National Conference on Education is really all about.
So we know that the last major conference that was held in education was in 2011. And so 11 years later, we look back and we want to see what exactly were the progresses that we've made, what are the major roadblocks and obstacles that we are still facing, and how do we overcome that and really transform education in our country. So the ideal situation is going out into the regions and ensuring that we have an understanding of people's ideas, their contributions, the agency, the voices of the youth, and of course the private sector, the communities, the parents. So we want to assess really in terms of the curriculum, the recommendations that were made, the major recommendations. Did we achieve them? What is still left to be achieved, and what is required for us to still work on issues that are outstanding? Mm-hmm. So that is the main aim of the national conference, is to garner support of the private sector, the public sector, the parents, the learners themselves, and to understand and move forward as a country in terms of what are the existing practices that we wish to keep, what are some of the existing practices we want to revisit and redesign, are there any new innovative practices as a country that we wish to adopt. And in order for us to do that, we'd very much like to hear input from our communities, our parents, and even the youth. They are the most important to tell us their views. And to do that, we then kick-started the regional consultations.
In regards to the regional consultations, how will the outcomes that will be, the outcomes from the consultations be applied, or how will they aid the conference? Well,
first and foremost, actually the regional consultations are twofold. One, our national consultation is set for August, the 2nd to the 5th of August 2022. However, in addition to that, Namibia is also co-leading with Italy on a global level on one of the action tracks for the Transforming Education Summit. So it is twofold, the regional consultations. How do that which we receive in terms of the challenges and the innovative practices that we wish to strengthen in our country, how does that also feed into on a global level? So, for example, we know the issue of financing education. We know that at least a country should spend 10% of its education budget on pre-primary. But the realities for us now is that it has been reduced. We only spend 2.9. How do we strengthen the foundational phase of early childhood development and pre-primary in our country? How do we get private sector and public-private partnerships to support us in our infrastructure development? And most importantly, what and how do parents see their role in contributing towards financing education for the children? So those are the kind of engagement that we really want to see happening. We want to see how do we become much more inclusive as a country, reaching out to the marginalized, the children and the people living with disability, employing them, gainfully and meaningfully, So those are the kind of discussions that we hope to have. One very key one is the financing of education.
Now, ED, I want us to go back to 2011 and some of the recommendations that were made there. How far did we come in implementing those?
Well, objectively said, I think we can be proud as a country over the past 11 years. For one of the major issues that we had to redesign was our curriculum. We've successfully done that. We know that there's still a lot of awareness raising in terms of better internalizing and understanding the curriculum reform that needs to happen. So the curriculum has been reformed. That is one of the key recommendations. Of course, the whole issue around fee-free education and exempting, or not just exempting, but actually the School Development Fund and parental contributions, the whole issue of introducing universal primary grants and universal secondary grants. Those are some of the achievements. One of the areas that we still need to strengthen and which require considerable resources is the issue of infrastructure development. But we did come up with one of the means of addressing that is to come up with an accelerated infrastructure development plan with a blueprint in terms of designs for construction of schools, etc. And like I said, there are just certain factors at this very moment that we're still looking into. So, and then of course, the Achilles heel, our weakness, is what is really transpiring and happening in the classroom with the teacher as a resource. Are we getting the quality teaching that the Namibian child deserves? That is a key question. And we see that with the education financing, most of our funding goes towards personnel expenditure. But do we really see learning outcomes? Because we know that poor progression of children, dropouts, children being frustrated in the system, children going out on the street, we need to ask, is that due to poor performance in the classroom? So I would say that we've achieved considerable a lot. However, UNICEF, our UN partner, independently works with a consultant equally to look at evidence-based approaches. Have we really achieved what we set out to achieve? So we can now say, probably more from a subjective point of view, that yes, we feel there has been considerable progress, although we acknowledge that there are areas to be strengthened, but we do work with an independent team.
All right.
And the nation, of course, will tell us. And these discussions that we will have in the regions will be based on short-term, medium, and long-term innovative practices.
Now, Edie, I've been informed that we are unfortunately running out of time, but I wanted us to touch on the announcement made by the UN the General Secretary, that is Antonio Guterres, who announced the hosting of the Transformation Education Summit, which will coincide with the 77th United Nations General Assembly in September. So perhaps just briefly touch on the importance of Namibia making part of a summit such as this.
I mean, it's a great honor indeed that Namibia was endorsed. We applied and it was endorsed that we lead with Italy on a key pillar, which is specifically looking on a global level, also on a country level. What are the best practices in terms of inclusive, equitable and safe and healthy schools on a global level? So we know that education is in a crisis all around the world, and it has been made worse, exacerbated by COVID-19. And so there was a need, for a new contract on education. How do we transform? What practices do we embrace? And Namibia actually is one of the countries where we submitted 4 best practices. We could have done more, but we submitted 4 best practices in terms of integrated school health, our information education, information system, as well as family literacy and the introduction of pre-vocational subjects for children in special schools, or what now they are called resource schools. So on a global level, Namibia is leading. And we also, all countries, UN member states, have to have national consultations, and by the 28th to the 30th of June in France, all ministers will meet and present position papers of their countries, which eventually will be refined in our national conference for His Excellency to present at the summit in September.
Thank you, Edie. Well, that was the Executive Director in the Ministry of Education, Arts and Culture, that is Sanit Steenkamp, talking to us about the National Education Conference slated for August 2022 and the consultations and Global Summit preceding that event. We will be back shortly. Stay with us.